You probably think dynamite is just a goofy red stick with a sparkly fuse that the coyote straps to a rock in old cartoons. Well, your whole childhood is a lie. It was actually born from a liquid so unstable that breathing on it wrong could erase your entire family from the planet, and the story of how this thing got built is pure uncut chaos. So let's rewind. Back in the 1800s, humanity had a massive problem: rock. Big, ugly, stubborn rock. We wanted to build railroads across entire continents. We wanted to dig mines a mile deep. We wanted to blast tunnels straight through solid mountains and carve canals through the planet itself. There was just one tiny issue. The only tool we had for breaking rock was black powder. And black powder, to put it nicely, was weak. It was the diet soda of explosives. It made a big puff of smoke, coughed a little, and politely asked you to please try again. You would pack a hole full of the stuff, light the fuse, brace yourself for a glorious explosion, and the rock would just sort of shrug at you. We were trying to build the modern world with the energy of a wet firecracker. We needed something stronger. We needed something with absolutely no chill whatsoever. Enter an Italian chemist named Ascanio Sobrero. In 1847, this guy was mixing chemicals in his lab like every bored scientist of his era, just vibing, combining glycerin with nitric acid and sulfuric acid to see what would happen. What happened was that he accidentally created the single most psychotic substance ever discovered by man. He called it pyroglycerin. We call it nitroglycerin. And the very moment he made it, he understood he had messed up profoundly. Because this liquid was angry. Like, deeply, personally angry at the concept of being alive. You couldn't shake it. You couldn't drop it. You couldn't heat it up even a little. You couldn't even look at it the wrong way on a bad day. The tiniest bump, the smallest vibration, the gentlest little tap, and it would detonate with a force roughly 1,000 times more violent than black powder. Sobrero tested a microscopic amount and it blew up in his face, scarring him for life. And instead of being hyped about his world-changing discovery, the man was completely horrified. He literally tried to keep it a secret. He wrote public warnings begging people not to mess with it. He looked at his own creation and basically said, "Yeah, no, this thing is cursed. Everyone please just pretend this never happened." But you cannot uninvent chaos. The cat was already out of the bag, and the cat was a liquid bomb that hated you. Now we need to talk about the main character of this whole disaster, a young Swedish dude named Alfred Nobel. Alfred was the kind of nerd who absolutely loved two things in this life: chemistry and aggressively disrespecting the laws of self-preservation. His dad, Emmanuel, ran an explosives and engineering business, so little Alfred basically grew up surrounded by things that go boom. It was the family vibe. So when Alfred first heard about this insane new liquid called nitroglycerin, he did not run away screaming like a normal, mentally stable human being would. Oh no. He looked at the most dangerous substance on the face of the earth, the stuff that scarred its own inventor and terrified an entire continent, and he thought, you know what would be a fun little project? Mass producing this thing in my backyard. At industrial scale, as a job. And that, right there, is where the building process turns into a full-blown horror movie. See, Alfred had a vision. He understood that if you could actually control nitroglycerin, you would be holding the most powerful tool in human history in your hands. Mining, tunneling, construction, demolition, all of it would be instantly revolutionized. There was just one minor obstacle standing in his way: the controlling part. Because at this stage, working with nitroglycerin was basically a coin flip between becoming filthy rich and becoming a fine red mist. The liquid would detonate completely at random. It would explode if it got too warm. It would explode if it got jostled around in a wagon on a bumpy road. It would explode if it just sat there long enough and got moody about it. Workers transporting it across the countryside would simply vanish in a fireball. Entire warehouses storing the stuff would randomly cease to exist overnight. Ships carrying it would blow up in the middle of the ocean. There are real stories of offices, hotels, and entire city blocks getting flattened because somebody, somewhere, left an innocent little can of this nightmare juice sitting in the wrong room at the wrong temperature. People genuinely called it the devil's oil. And honestly, the branding was accurate. But Alfred was not worried about minor details, like the entire planet being absolutely terrified of his chosen product. He was locked in. He was built different. He set up a lab and started experimenting, and his very first real breakthrough was actually a certified galaxy brain move. He invented something called the blasting cap. Here is the genius part. Instead of trying to light the nitroglycerin directly like a complete maniac, which would obviously, instantly atomize you, Alfred created a separate little detonator. A tiny, controlled initial explosion using a small amount of gunpowder packed inside a cap, which would then set off the big nitroglycerin payload in a clean, deliberate way. This was absolutely massive. For the very first time in history, you could actually trigger nitroglycerin on purpose, exactly when you wanted to, instead of just praying it didn't decide to trigger itself while you were eating your lunch 3 feet away. The blasting cap is honestly one of the most important inventions in the entire history of explosives, and somehow nobody ever talks about it. It was the difference between uncontrollable random death liquid and an actual usable tool. Alfred had officially cracked half of the puzzle. He could now detonate the stuff reliably and on command. There was just one teeny tiny, completely catastrophic problem still remaining. The nitroglycerin itself was still an absolute psychopath. It still blew up whenever it personally felt like it, whether you wanted it to or not, and Alfred was about to find out, in the most brutal way imaginable, exactly how high the price of his obsession could climb. In 1864, disaster struck, and it struck in the most personal, devastating way possible. The family factory in Stockholm, the very place where they were cooking up fresh batches of this liquid demon, exploded. And not some little explosion, a complete, total, building-erasing annihilation. The blast killed 5 people instantly, and one of those 5 people was Alfred's own younger brother, Emil. Emil was only 21 years old. He was helping run the family business, working hands-on with the exact substance his obsessed older brother could not stop chasing, and in one single deafening instant, he was just gone, along with the entire building around him. Let that actually sink in for a second. The man's relentless pursuit of the perfect explosive literally killed his own little brother. This is the part of the story that the funny cartoons always conveniently leave out. Behind that silly red stick is a genuine, gut-wrenching tragedy. Alfred's father was so destroyed by the loss of his son that he suffered a stroke not long after and spent the rest of his life partially paralyzed in his chair. The whole family was shattered into pieces, and the public was officially done. They were terrified beyond words. The city of Stockholm looked at this smoking crater where a building used to proudly stand and basically said, "Yeah, big no. You are absolutely not doing that here anymore, buddy." The authorities banned Alfred from rebuilding his factory anywhere inside the city limits. Nobody on Earth wanted this walking human disaster cooking up liquid death anywhere near their homes, their families, or their general airspace. He was a pariah, a living, breathing hazard. The local legend whose little hobby kept casually leveling neighborhoods. So what did Alfred do? Did he finally quit? Did he take the extremely loud and obvious hint that maybe, just maybe, manufacturing the most unstable substance known to mankind was a genuinely terrible idea? Absolutely not. This man had zero quit anywhere in his entire body. Instead, he did something so unhinged that it loops all the way back around to being kind of iconic. Since he was no longer allowed to build a factory on land, he moved his entire operation onto a barge, a boat, in the literal middle of a lake. He set up a floating nitroglycerin laboratory out on Lake Mälaren and just kept right on experimenting, presumably so that when it inevitably blew sky high, it would only take out himself and some extremely unlucky fish in the immediate area. Picture this guy for a moment. Exiled from polite society, bobbing around on a raft loaded with explosives, completely surrounded by the exact substance that had just murdered his little brother, and he is still grinding. Still convinced, against all evidence and several funerals, that he could tame this beast. That is either the most tragic or the most heroic level of pure stubbornness ever recorded in human history, and honestly, it is probably both at the same time. And here is the wild thing. Out there on that ridiculous boat, while every single person on the shore was just patiently waiting for the inevitable boom, Alfred was actually getting closer. He spent ages obsessively hunting for a way to make nitroglycerin stable. He tried mixing it with all sorts of random materials: wood pulp, cement, charcoal, sawdust, brick dust. Every powder he could possibly get his hands on. He was basically running a one-man science fair where every single failed experiment had a very real chance of being his last one ever. He needed to find some specific substance that could soak up the liquid, hold it tightly, calm its nerves all the way down, and transform it from a screaming, twitchy maniac into something a normal person could actually carry around without first writing out their will and saying goodbye to their loved ones. And then came the breakthrough. And, like so many of the best inventions in all of history, the popular story says it was completely, gloriously by accident. The legend goes like this. When nitroglycerin was shipped from place to place, It was often packed inside metal cans and cushioned with a soft, chalky, sedimentary material called Kieselguhr. You might also know it as diatomaceous earth, which is just a fancy science name for a powdery, porous rock made entirely from the fossilized skeletons of microscopic ancient algae. They used it purely as packing material. It was the bubble wrap of the 1860s. Nothing special, just dusty filler. But one day, Alfred happened to notice that some of the nitroglycerin had leaked out of its container during transport and gotten completely absorbed into this boring Kieselguhr powder. And here comes the magic. The soaked up nitroglycerin didn't explode. It didn't detonate. It didn't murder anyone. It just sat there. Stable, calm, chilling, vibing peacefully like it had been through therapy. Alfred's brain must have done a full backflip in his skull. He realized that this dull, porous, completely overlooked packing dust could soak up around 3 times its own weight in liquid nitroglycerin and somehow, impossibly, domesticate the beast. The diatomaceous earth absorbed the devil's oil and turned the screaming liquid death into a stable, moldable, friendly little paste. A paste you could actually shape with your hands. A paste you could squeeze into convenient sticks. A paste you could drop on the floor, kick across the room, throw at a wall, and even casually set on fire, and it would just stubbornly refuse to explode until you hit it with a blasting cap, which, conveniently, was the exact device Alfred had already invented years earlier. Both halves of the impossible puzzle finally, beautifully clicked together at the same time. He had actually done it. He had taken the single most dangerous substance known to all of humanity and turned it into something safe enough to literally mail in a package. In 1867, he patented his creation and gave it a name pulled straight out of an action movie. He called it dynamite, from the Greek word dynamis, which simply means power. And honestly, fair. The name absolutely slaps, and we all know it. Dynamite changed the entire world basically overnight. Suddenly, you could blast through a mountain without your workers randomly evaporating mid-shift. Railroads shot across entire countries in record time. Mines dug deeper into the earth than anyone had ever dreamed possible. Tunnels were carved straight through solid bedrock. Massive engineering projects like the Panama Canal suddenly went from impossible fantasy to active construction site. The entire modern world that you live in right now, with all its highways, its tunnels, its mines, and the deep foundations holding up every skyscraper you have ever seen, was basically carved out of the planet using goofy red sticks invented by a stubborn Swedish guy on a boat. It made construction faster, safer, and cheaper than anyone on Earth thought was even remotely possible. And it made Alfred Nobel one of the richest men on the entire planet. But of course, this absolute roller coaster of a story has one final, deeply ironic twist, because the universe has a genuinely sick and twisted sense of humor. Years later, in 1888, Alfred's other brother, Ludwig, passed away, and the French newspaper completely fumbled the entire situation. They somehow got confused and thought it was Alfred who had died, so they went ahead and printed a savage obituary for the wrong Nobel brother. The headline reportedly read something along the lines of, "The Merchant of Death is dead." The article absolutely roasted Alfred, painting him as a cold man who got obscenely rich by inventing brand new ways to kill people faster than ever before in human history. So just imagine it. You wake up on a normal morning, you grab your coffee, you open up the newspaper, and you read your own obituary describing you as a glorified mass murderer who made a fortune off of death. That brutal gut punch supposedly hit Alfred so hard that he spiraled into a full-blown existential crisis about his entire legacy. He genuinely did not want to be remembered forever as the death merchant. So when he actually died for real, in 1896, he left almost his entire massive fortune, all the money he had made off of his beautiful, terrifying, world-changing exploding sticks, to fund a brand new set of prizes for the people who benefit humanity the most. And you have definitely heard of them. The Nobel Prizes? Yeah, that Nobel. The Nobel Peace Prize, the single most prestigious award on Earth for promoting peace among all of mankind, is funded entirely by the guy who got world famous for blowing things up, the man who accidentally killed his own brother, while building explosives, somehow ended up becoming the eternal patron saint of world peace. You genuinely, truly could not write this stuff if you tried. So the next time you spot a goofy stick of dynamite in some cartoon, I need you to remember the real truth. It was not always a joke. It started as a screaming, cursed liquid that scarred its own inventor, terrified entire cities into banning it, killed a man's beloved little brother, exiled that man to a boat in the middle of a lake, and then somehow, against every possible odd, ended up funding the most peaceful and prestigious award on the entire planet. Your whole childhood really, truly was a lie. And the story of how this silly little red stick actually got built was, from the very first spark to the very last twist, pure, uncut, beautifully unhinged chaos.